I want to do a video about muzzle brakes in reference a little bit to a previous video about muzzle jump, but this is about muzzle brakes. And I'll first of all touch base on the fact that there's a misconception through some people that a muzzle brake doesn't affect things until after the bullet has left the barrel, and prior to that it's not doing anything. Well, that isn't the case. There is air in front of the bullet. When that bullet starts to travel, it pushes that air out first, and so that means there is, although very small movements, essentially the muzzle brake can cause it can start to affect the rifle before the bullet's left. It's why a muzzle brake can help with accuracy. It's also actually why a muzzle brake can hurt with accuracy. That first bit of air is actually helping control the rifle, or it can actually be making the rifle do the wrong thing prior to the bullet leaving. And like I said, that's the air in front of the barrel that is being pushed out by the bullet. It's at super high speed, super high pressure as well, and it is actually causing the barrel to respond in reference to the muzzle brake prior to the bullet leaving. So I'll carry on with the basic rest of about muzzle brakes, how they work and what I'm talking about there, but I would like to keep that in mind. Prior to the bullet leaving, a muzzle brake can affect what the rifle is actually doing. Simply along the lines of the gas that's pushing straight out here. There's both gas in front of the bullet, what's actually laying in your barrel before you pull the button, before you pull the trigger, and all the gas coming behind behind the bullet, which is what is coming out. The moment that gas can come out, the moment it's not being pushed down the barrel, it's able to expand. When it hits against a face, like this face here, it depends on the size of that face and how many areas of that face that it can actually push on, which creates the efficiency of a muzzle brake. So essentially, with these two muzzle brakes, the efficiencies are about the same. Even though this is a very broad muzzle brake, this is quite a narrow one. The actual immediate area here is where the surface area is really effective in reducing the amount of recoil. The difference really in these muzzle brakes, and the way I like to use the wide muzzle brakes, is simply that this, being a lot wider, forces the gas, actually controls the gas to go a lot more to the side, which is simply about limiting the amount of dust that gets thrown back up off the ground. This is, as I said, just as efficient in the way of being a muzzle brake, but because the ports are a lot closer to the centre here, the gas is able to go down. So although you're getting the same recoil retardation, you're getting more dust thrown back up from our low position by prone shooting. Another very efficient muzzle brake. This is one of the T5 Terminator brake from Terminator Products. Greg over in Kiwi Greg over in New Zealand making this unit. Very efficient muzzle brake, really good in controlling recoil. This is the T5, so it ends up with even more ports. So it's a long muzzle brake, and it's essentially getting more surface area to do its job by the amount of ports it's got out of the sight here. Very efficiently designed. Still being a round muzzle brake makes it nice, limits the amount of space it takes up, but we get a fair bit of blast down on the ground. So something that is needing to run a ground sheet or something like that to do the low position pro shooting we do in the dirt, but a very efficient brake. The next sides of it, the other sides of it that we tend to deal with, is the sort of shooting you're doing. You can obviously simply have the barrel muzzle brakes, which are just lots of drill holes around the end there, which also work quite efficiently. They are not as efficient as a larger screw-on style muzzle brake most of the time, but they are still working, they're still doing their job. The negative of that sort of thing, especially when they've got drill holes at the base of the barrel, the base of the muzzle, is they're pushing dirt straight down, or pushing air straight down. So in the form of the people shooting in a bench rest situation, sitting in basically where the muzzle is 1.5 meters off the ground, or 1 meter off the ground, or sitting over the top of a concrete bench, there's not too much, apart from blowing your gear around the place, things like that, there's really not too much of an issue with it, so they work quite well. In the situation of using them as a hunting rifle, where you're standing up alongside a tree, then there's absolutely no problems at all with that sort of muzzle brake. In prone position shooting, when we're shooting down on the ground and we're not shooting in wet ground, we're shooting in dry, dusty ground, then there is quite a big issue. This is one of the first, this is the Hinterland Shooting Supplies, or the HSS muzzle brake, that had this flat shelf on the bottom of it. that stops that gas from going straight down, and that worked quite well by simply stopping the dust. And that worked as its own level. That was a nice feature to put on for a rifle. There is a negative feature to that as well. I'll get that in a little while. But in this sort of thing, a 308, 243, 223, where we do have muzzle brakes on, they're working quite efficiently with that sort of brake on there. Just a clamp-on brake works quite efficiently. When you can go to essentially where I've gone even further. This muzzle brake here is the one that I used, which I had modified essentially and changed the design. What I was actually going through at that stage was trying to stop muzzle rise, muzzle jump. Was on this rifle, on the 338, and essentially I'd got to a point where it was still jumping more than it should do. So what I had, without looking at things properly, I then put even more of a ramp. I actually cut these sides of the bottom of the brake in and put more of a ramp in. So essentially that was to make the gas go up, which would give more push down on the front of the rifle. So what I found was that was actually a mistake, because when I analysed properly, I had done this, the rifle was still jumping, so you couldn't see it by the naked eye. I then videoed the action of the rifle, slowed it right down, and as you can see here in the little clip, this was actually causing the muzzle to push down hard and then bounce back afterwards. So even when I did my job very thoroughly on the back of the rifle, and I had been working at the back of the rifle, changing points and bracing things up and doing all sorts of bits and pieces to try and stop this, in analysing it I realised that I had created a problem out of going too far here. That's where I came back to this muzzle brake, where I created a very simple clean muzzle brake, so it's very straight. There's no upward inclination at all. That is dead straight as it goes across the bottom of all those ports are dead straight across, and I put in these ports on the top. Now to start off with, I had 3 ports. A port back here, and then these 2 ports in the front. When I first fired it, the problem was a lot better, but it was still pushing down a little bit in the front. I then removed this rear port. So this is obviously where the highest pressure is. It's the first one from the exit of the barrel. This is the highest pressure. So I actually filled this port back in and just ended up with 2 ports in these front chambers, which have less pressure and less downforce because of it. And this now cycles very straight. It's a very straight action, straight forward and back, and works really well. I would say with all that, essentially, is that this rifle, being the design of the stock that it is, that does have this flexibility through this point, and I'm shooting a lot of powder through a 338. I did a lot of learning about things with this rifle. I got my shoulder point, I got my butt pad to the right height, I put braces through here, I did all the bits and pieces, and then I finished tuning things with the muzzle brake. You'll notice on the back of this, I have this, the butt pad up nice and high, so it's right where actually my shoulder contact point is directly in line with the barrel. So when it pushes, it's pushing very straight. If you didn't have that done, so you haven't got your butt pad in the right place, that's all the way down by an inch down here, so then all of a sudden your line of force is where it naturally, when it comes back, it wants to lift the rifle up. Now if you put on a muzzle brake like this one here, that has very sharp inclinations on here, so it puts a lot of downforce. So if you did that with the butt pad in the wrong place, and then quite a bit of downforce in your muzzle brake, you end up with something that looks a lot better to shoot, but in actual fact you've got your rifle bending to fight things, because this is trying to push it up, so it's going like this is trying to push it down. So you'll actually, if you slowed it down enough, you can actually see in some of those instances the barrel actually bend. So it is flexible. As you'll know on any rifle, they will flex inside their action. So you can actually have that whole action and barrel bending from the stock coming down, and your stock is trying to push the other way. As I've said, even this is the hinterland shooting clamp on, that because it has a bottom shelf and it doesn't have a top shelf, these, and this is the one that I actually had on the 338. Now I would say the hinterland shooting brake is, these fellas are a nice brake, they work really well. I would never recommend to put a clamp on a Magnum caliber. Yes, this is a clamp on, I had it on my 338. The trick is, I'd actually machined out the inside and I'd threaded the inside of this as well. So it was threaded and clamp on my 338. That's why I was running it there. But my actual jumping problem had started from this fella because it was pushing down. Now listen, I'd like to point out that I'm not saying this is a bad brake. I'm not saying this will cause that problem. And I think for the average rifle, so the average rifle which has the normal setup in the way of its stock, it has a little bit of muzzle rise, and that the nature of the stock is doing that. These work quite well because of the nature of them having a flat base and not using on higher calibers. It means the combination of the two, the little bit of muzzle rise is then balanced by this little bit of a shelf. That little bit of a shelf is what protects the dust from going on the ground. It works quite well. But you can put this same, you have to be careful about using this sort of brake on a rifle that is set up perfectly straight, because you could find you're getting a little bit of a push down. And my honest call would be, from what I've learned, as I've said, the straighter you can set up the whole rifle so the whole action is dead straight, then that means you do not want an uneven, you do not want a muzzle brake that forces the muzzle to go up or down. So this sort of thing is actually going to encourage the muzzle to push down as it actually fires, because it is uneven, because it has a shelf on the bottom and open at the top. So the same as if it's this is the same thing in the way of being negative for a dead straight action. If this whole rifle shot dead straight, those ports in the top are going to be a negative. So the nuts and the bolts of what I'm trying to say with all that is really try and get your rifle to shoot dead straight without a muzzle brake. Now that may be hard. Obviously, setting up a Magnum rifle, you want to shoot it with a muzzle brake. Then you use the logic of engineering, which means that you start with a dead even muzzle brake. So it isn't encouraging any up or down movement. By its nature, it is only, and that's simply, you can look at the design, you know, a normal muzzle brake like this, it's dead straight, there's no up and down in it. So and all of them, from this style of muzzle brake, it's dead straight, there's no up and down. This style of muzzle brake, there's no up and down. You can obviously take any one of these muzzle brakes and bore holes in things to tune things if you need to, but ideally you're not doing that. You're making it cycle properly without doing that. So the purpose of this video is to say that essentially not all muzzle brakes are your friend, not all going to help. It isn't just put a muzzle brake on it and it'll fix everything. It is a case of bringing everything, every component on your rifle has to work. As in most things in this world, combination is everything. A product, an individual bit is not where everything is answered. It's the combination of products and bits and pieces that ends up with the really good operation of a rifle, as I said, as of most things.